Hi everyone and welcome for a new live AMA. How is everyone doing? I hope you had a great week, you're ready for the weekend, and before that, you're ready to ask questions to our guest today. So before we get started, I would like just to thank a few people that have been supporting me as monthly subscriber on my Buy Me a Coffee. So thank you to Yinch, Zappa, Andrea, and Roy for just supporting me all the time and also being super active on the Discord. So as I mentioned on social media this week, it really motivates me to always be looking for new interesting founders and stories every month. So thanks a lot to you. Also, today I really can't wait to get the AMA started. Today I'm joined by Molly Johnson-Jones, and she's the co-founder of Flexa Careers. But I'm going to let her introduce herself in a minute. Just to mention, I actually came across her through her LinkedIn post that she recently shared, and as soon as I saw some of her short posts, I was like, okay, I need to get her on the stream to hear more about her story. She just closed her second funding round, and she was briefly teasing about some challenges she's been through. So, without further ado, Molly, I'm really happy to have you here today. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really looking forward to having a conversation. So thank you.
Me too, me too. I actually even received questions for you this morning from people who couldn't join the live stream today, but still wanted to ask you some questions. So I'm really excited about that. And also, well, thank you to Metamurai for your subscribe on Twitch. Thanks a lot. That's really amazing to have you around for such a long time. So let's get started. Molly, what about we start by you telling us more about who you are and also what's your company about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Molly, obviously, and I am one of the co-founders of Flexa Careers. Flexa is an employer brand and talent attraction platform. What we do is we verify companies' working environments. So we've all been through the job hunting process where you apply to a load of jobs, you don't know what the company probably even does, and you definitely don't know what it's going to be like to work there. So we bring all of that information up to the very front. So, you can search and say, I want to join a company that is dog friendly and will let me work from home 2 days a week with flexible hours. All of those will come up in front of you and you'll see which ones are hiring. So we're changing the way that the world thinks about job hunting and makes it easier for people to find their perfect fit, and it makes it easier for companies to get discovered for the right reasons. My background, I started off in investment banking, and then I moved into market research and then strategy consulting. But it was actually my experience when I was working in investment banking as an equity researcher that led us to sort of found Flexa, but about 6 years after it actually happened. So I have an autoimmune disease that means I'm technically classified as disabled. And thankfully, it's very rare now, but there are some days where I can't walk. And when I was working in investment banking, I asked to work from home 1 day a week. That was like roughly how often it happened. Thankfully, now it's about 1 day a quarter. So it's obviously reduced a lot because of flexible working. And they let me do that once. They let me work from home once, and then they put a settlement package in front of me, sacked me, and told me to leave straight away, even though they said they were open to flexible working requests. So then go through a load of job hunting processes, never able to find the right thing. Fast forward to early 2020, and we decided to solve that problem and make it easier for people to find really great companies to work for that are truly flexible and have great cultures that aren't going to do the same thing to people.
Mm-hmm. That is so relevant today because when you talk to people and you feel that there has been some kind of change when it comes to the expectations. So when we think about the market for platforms where you find jobs, you usually think about a very crowded market. You obviously your approach is very different because you focus on the benefits and the flexibility from employers. But still, how do you stand up in such a big market where you already have lots of actors in place, and apart from just it's not just about the specificity of the platform, but it's also about getting the word out, I guess.
No, it's a good question. And I think kind of on the surface of it, recruitment is a pretty grim space to be in. But we don't call ourselves a job platform, nor are we really about direct recruitment. So if you think about hiring as like a marketing funnel, and at the kind of middle of that funnel, at the kind of engagement point, is where traditional job platforms and recruiters will sit. So they'll be in the middle, and you're just saying, I have a marketing manager role that's open and I just want people to come in and apply. And you're kind of just like cramming them into the middle of the funnel. And then at the bottom, you're converting them with your own recruitment processes, your own ATS, your internal workings. But where we sit is at that very top, what we call the discoverability and awareness point. Mm-hmm. So the only other things that sit up there would be Glassdoor or social media. There's no easy way for companies to get discovered by candidates. It has to be very reactive. So it's very difficult to build a hiring pipeline of people that are sitting there wanting to work for you, going, I can't wait until they hire. And it's very difficult to appeal to a broader audience than a few hundred people who stumbled across your job description. And that in time, as we see now, then leads to hiring bottlenecks, because in markets where it's difficult to appeal to candidates, such as it is now, obviously the power balance is shifting towards employee and away from employer, and people can demand more. We've kind of reached this hiring bottleneck, but there are just as many people. But the thing is they can apply to hundreds of different jobs and demand so much that people just aren't getting those applications as easily. Whereas if you've worked at the very top of your hiring funnel and you've built that employer brand, then you will still be able to hire in these kind of markets, because you've still got a pipeline of warm leads effectively wanting to apply to your roles. So that's how we've stood out with that messaging, is focusing on an area of the market that is largely quite untapped. It was interesting. We actually started as a job platform, a traditional, like a LinkedIn or an Indeed. We started as that. You could apply as a candidate. We had the onboarding process, everything. And we had that for about 9 months. And then we suddenly realized that actually the problem could be solved a lot better in a way that no one has ever tackled before. And since we pivoted, which was in kind of late February, early March of this year, we've grown so much faster. We're now at 120 companies on our platform. And that's in kind of less than a year of actually being able to come on as a client, and over 300,000 users as well. So the growth has been really rapid, and it's been that shift away from that crowded direct recruitment space and up towards the idea of employer brand and building your attractiveness to candidates.
Mm-hmm. What's the main thing, the main expectation, or the main benefit, or the main type of flexibility people are really interested in?
Yeah. We collect all of that data in our onboarding process, and it's so interesting because we've seen some like really big shifts over the last 18 months. So the most in-demand way of working, which 55% of people want, is to work from home 3 to 4 days a week, but to go into an office 1 to 2 days a week. The second most popular would be fully remote working. So, don't have to go into an office at any time. And that's about 24% of all users. And that's based on literally tens of thousands of people as a data set. And then about half of everybody would like to work flexible hours, as in something better than core hours of 10 till 4. So starting earlier and finishing later, or vice versa. And then what we've seen emerge that we never thought would, over the last 18 months, is that people really value having a work from anywhere scheme. Mm-hmm. So the ability to move and work from anywhere for a certain period of time. And that's now 45% of people would love that, which literally never existed before the pandemic, because people didn't travel and work. Like, it's been a really interesting transition. And dog-friendly offices, because so many people have got dogs now. 33% of people would love to work in a dog-friendly office as well. So it's a really big amount.
Is the difference, the shift, did really happen with COVID, or is something that is also, that was something started also before the pandemic?
It definitely existed before, because we launched before the pandemic, about 3 weeks before the pandemic started. So we'd seen an opportunity, but it definitely wasn't as big as it is now. The pandemic has accelerated the shifting power between employer and employee, or candidate and company. And I think the reason for that is because obviously what used to be that real connecting factor of the office and that physical presence and everybody believing that was the way that it was done just disappeared overnight. And so kind of starting afresh and starting from anew. And that's meant that a lot of people that may have never been able to work flexibly, particularly men, because a lot of them saw a negative stigma attached to flexible working. Their opinions have now shifted and they've realised the positive impact that it can make. So it's very interesting seeing the gender balance change in our users, seeing the different filters and what people are putting on change. But it's starting to shift back a little bit, where not every company that comes to us to get verified is passing at all. It used to be that about 40% of companies would fail our verification, so they weren't flexible enough. And now that's going up to about 50, and that's happened over the past 2 weeks. So it's a really interesting transition. I think people thought that the world was just going to be totally flexible, whereas now we're seeing a lot of people going back to the office full time.
Yes. Do you think that COVID has helped people understand and kind of experiment with remote working? Do you think that it has had a positive effect on their view of remote working, or au contraire, because people were forced, it wasn't by choice, but they were forced to work remotely, this has actually pushed more people to be excited to get back to the office?
I think it depends on the kind of person that you are. I think that a lot of people have realized the kind of benefits of a balance of both. I think that the people that are at the real two ends of the spectrum of always wanting to work from home and never go anywhere, or always wanting to go into the office and never work from home, that's sort of dwindling. And it's more that people are moving into that middle, the kind of reversion to that way of working of the 1 to 2 days a week in the office and then the rest of the time at home. So you get the benefits of human contact and being out of your own living room or spare room or whatever, and actually seeing people, but also having the freedom and the choice to be able to say, today I feel like working from home, or today I feel like going to the office.
You talk about flexible working, and I would say that's kind of one category of benefits when you're joining a company. And being involved in the startup scene, I have seen so many founders trying to find ways to attract talents. Do you think that now flexibility is number one versus all the other benefits that you can think of and that you see right now in startups? I mean, before the pandemic, everyone was seeing or thinking that having free beers, free pizza was really the big deal. And well, there have been lots of different views on that. But do you think that now flexibility is really the number one, really on the top, and people should be more focusing on this?
Yeah, I think it depends on the definition of what you call flexibility. So I think I actually really don't like the term flexible working, but there's no better term. So I kind of have to adopt it. I think flexible working implies either flexible hours or location, and that's it. Whereas actually I think flexible working encompasses so much more than that. I'm just going to turn my light on because it's getting really
Sure,
dark.
no problem at all.
I think it encompasses so much more, and that can include work from anywhere schemes, enhanced family leave, enhanced annual leave, unlimited sick leave, dog-friendly offices. I think I've already said that one. Work from anywhere schemes, work from home allowance, co-working space allowances. Like, I classify all of those benefits as adding to someone's freedom and adding to someone's choice. So for me, they're still flexible working, just in a different definition. We've seen a real increase in benefits being used as a way to differentiate one company from another. So as you said, like some startups offering the most amazing, like full work from home allowances, everything paid, unlimited annual leave, everything that you could possibly want. And that definitely is increasing in popularity. But again, it's that sense of choice and freedom, I think, is the biggest reason that people are choosing certain companies above others. People don't want to be told what to do quite as much as I think they were willing to put up with before. And so, it's that focus on freedom and choice.
We have a few people on the chat. Nicola says that she's sorry for the way you were treated, and that's really awful. So I completely agree with that. Yinch has a question. So, has flexible working arrangements affected wages offered, expected, or accepted? And I think that's a very relevant question, because I have seen some news, especially in the US, not that much in the UK, but from companies adjusting the salary based on whether you're based in the office or not.
Yeah. I personally think it shouldn't affect it. I think fundamentally the shift towards remote or flexible working requires a shift to an output-driven culture. And if you're moving towards an output-driven culture, then you should be paying based on output, not location. I think there is a worrying trend of the idea that salary was always tied to living costs. And I think that that treats people a little bit too much like a resource. Like you're not working, well, hopefully you're not just working to live. It's more than that. And that's a choice that you've made. And I think that the companies that start to tie salary too closely to where you're living will very quickly start to lose talent, because it treats you as a resource and not as a human.
Definitely makes sense, and that's just so negative. I mean, why would you be paid less for the same job just because you're based a few miles further away? That doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
We have a question from Roy, and I think that's the good time to get to that. So you haven't really mentioned the name, but on your website we can find information about FlexiField, the seal of approval assessment. So I guess that's what you mentioned about approving the companies. So
Right.
what it is, how do you construct that, and how do you really assess the capability of the company to be accepted? What do you take in consideration?
Yeah, so we call it flexification and our flexified companies.
Oh, okay. I read the question wrong then.
No, it's fine. And how we've built that is we basically collected tens of thousands of data points, both of what companies offer and of what employees perceive and expect. So the first stage is very objective. We put a company through a quiz, which is available on our website. Anybody can do it. And it takes about 2 minutes and gives you free insights of exactly how you stack up against the market. But we basically score companies based on location, hours, and benefits, and key cultural indicators like proportion of senior leadership working flexibly, request processes, etc. And we give them a score out of 100. That's all automatically weighted because we've built this index. We change it all the time based on trends that are emerging and what we see as being more or less popular. And if a company scores above 60%, then they are eligible to go on to the next stage. And as I mentioned, about 40% of companies fail there. Then the second stage is we survey a minimum of 10% of the employees of a company internally. It's another survey that takes about 2 minutes. And it's more perception based. So we obviously verify that the working environment is the case, but we also ask, do you feel supported? Have you had access to everything that you expected to? Is your manager supportive of flexible working? How would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? Various different perception based questions. And again, a company has to score an average of over 60% in order to pass. It's a pretty rigorous process, but also we've tried to make it as kind of streamlined and easy to do as possible. And an additional 10% of companies fail between those two stages, where sometimes what they say is the case isn't necessarily the case in a company. And we do see it happen, which is why we do the second stage. And at the end of that, that's when a company is eligible to be on Flexa, have the company page, get found by hundreds of thousands of people for offering flexibility.
Yinch asked, is there any trend in the size of companies that have been good employer candidates, so of the size of companies that actually passed the test? And what is the biggest and smallest size of company that you have signed on?
Yeah. So I'll answer the last question first. So the smallest company that we've signed on, I think, is 3 people, tiny. Okay. The biggest company, I think it has about 8,000 employees. It definitely gets harder as a company gets bigger to be truly flexible. We see that the kind of average score starts to come down. Obviously, there's way more people. It's harder to have blanket policies. It's harder to control what managers do and don't allow. It's harder to control the culture when it gets bigger. The kind of size of company that we've seen really taking the lead on flexible working trends has been companies somewhere between kind of seed stage and Series C. If we're talking about kind of funding aspects, see, that's a proxy. Plenty of unfunded companies are also flexible, but roughly that stage in their business cycle. Maybe somewhere between about 25 and 500 employees, very focused on working environment. They probably started off flexible or remote, and so then it's easier to continue that. There hasn't been this kind of shift through the pandemic. So that's generally the kind of company that we see, and like particularly in the tech space, because they sort of have to be in order to retain and attract talent.
And now, when it comes to inside these companies, who are the biggest to push for changes? Because I guess it's not everyone being on the same page all the time, especially as you get to bigger companies. So, is there specific roles that are actually pushing and actively helping to adopt some changes in terms of company culture? Because it comes down to the culture in the end.
Yeah, generally it's kind of HR teams or
Okay.
associated people that we'll see doing that, because they obviously see all the time and firsthand what's best for their employees, and for recruitment, and they want to lead that charge and making sure that there's the best possible working environment and culture. And we often talk to some very frustrated HR people sometimes, where they're saying, I'm trying to get approval for flexibility from senior leadership, but they're worried about all the risks that might come with it. I personally think there are enormous risks. You can phase it quite cleverly and quite carefully. But they'll be banging their heads against the wall because they know that people are going to leave and that they'll struggle to hire. So generally the driving force behind creating more, sorry, my dog's shaking now, creating more flexibility and more choice in the workplace is HR and talent.
Okay. And Roy asks also, how much would you say have managers supported keeping remote working because they really see the value? So now that we understand it's more the HR pushing for a change in culture, what about the managers? What are the answers to that?
It really varies. Really varies. There are lots of kind of factors that will influence how supportive someone is, their background, how much they've been forced to come into the office. You know, it's like that classic thing. I'm sure we all had those teachers at school where they're like really mean, and it's because their teachers were really mean to them. Like that happens in working environments as well, where people are like, well, I went into the office every day, so everyone should do the same as me. It's a very, very sweeping statement, and I'm aware of how it sounds, but as a rule, millennials are the most supportive of flexible working, and the older generations are slightly more cautious of it, again, because of the unknown, and the fact that it wasn't the norm for them. So often we see it, they find it a little bit harder to adapt to, which is totally understandable. So millennial managers generally kind of are quite comfortable with it. Also depends on industry. Finance, insurance, recruitment, they're all probably a little bit behind the curve when it comes to adopting it. And I think, again, that's about the management of it. The office has been, they're very office-centric industries, and it takes time to change that.
No, for sure. And depending on what you do, sometimes your job requires you to really have this human contact. If you rely a lot on brainstorming, you can do it online, but it's about finding the right balance for the right role, I guess.
Yeah.
So now to keep it more about your own personal experience, how did it really happen from switching from experiencing the problem, being job hunting? Well, first you lost your job, so that's not really a good mood to be on. When you start job hunting and everything, or when you start a company. How did it happen to really think about, okay, I'm experiencing this, I'm sure I'm not the only one, what can I do for that? And then just start your own company based on that.
So we had the idea for it properly in 2019. Maurice, my co-founder, and he was working at a really flexible company back in 2017, and he was still there in 2019. They were very ahead of the curve. But they didn't use it as a talent attraction tool. They used it as a employee retention tool. And then there was obviously my experience, and I'd gone through various different roles after losing my job, not really finding the level of flexibility that I kind of needed, whether somewhere made you feel bad about working flexibly, or whether the culture, lots of traveling, because I was a consultant for a while as well, and it didn't really work. So then we got to 2019 and we were like, well, if there are companies that have it and they're not using it as a talent attraction tool, and there's plenty, I'd spoken to so many people like me that had similar experiences, whether it was through illness, family circumstances, working mothers coming back from maternity leave, working fathers coming back from paternity leave, like so many different circumstances that meant that people were discriminated against, and flexibility would have meant that they weren't. We were in the pub and we decided to try to start a business, and we couldn't, neither of us are techie, So we couldn't build the website. So we went out in search of our CTO, Tim. Thank God we found him because he's brilliant. And he said, yeah, I'm on board. I think it's a great idea. So we started building the product in late 2019. And we launched into closed alpha with friends and family. We were all still working. Morris was contracting kind of 3 days a week, and I was working 4 days a week. I'd come down from full time, and Tim was still working. And we launched into closed alpha with family and friends, and then iterated that into beta, and it kind of took off. Like we grew in beta, which was 2 months to with no paid spend or anything, about 30 trial companies, and what would we have been at about 6,000 users. So we were like, well,
That's
people.
great, yeah.
Then I took the plunge and quit my job in August of 2020. Tim quit in September of 2020, and then Morris stopped contracting. So then we were all in it and full time.
That's a big step, right?
Yeah, that's a big step. And I would always say to anybody to like, don't quit before you have anything. Like try and make it work on the side if you're contracting, or if you've got some savings, great. But like I didn't, so I still worked part-time, and I'm glad I did that. Otherwise I think I'd have been scared shitless about what happened. And we raised our first funding round September of 2020, just small pre-seed. Managed to hire 2 people. We've been 5 until we just closed our last round like a week ago. And we'll be 8 or 9 by the end of the year, which is very exciting. We made 2 offers this week and hired a PR agency, so it's been very busy.
Great. It's going really, it seems to go really fast, so that's good for you. It's definitely fast. Yinch asks, what was the most unexpected barriers in starting at Flexa?
Fundraising.
Fundraising, okay.
The bit of the business that I love is growing it and the product and the 2 sides of the marketplace, and everyone was like, that'll be the hardest bit. No, it's been fundraising. I hate it. I find it so hard. Lots of different reasons. I think I definitely didn't expect it to be as difficult as it has been. People hate the recruitment space, and even though we're in, you always talk about red ocean, blue ocean, we are in blue ocean territory, but in a industry that isn't very attractive to investors, so we have to fight through that stigma and that perception first of all. The second thing that I have found a little bit depressing is being a female founder, and you are treated quite differently, is the sad reality. And there are so many stories that you have, like we talk about it later, but it's depressing.
Yes.
And you realize that it's not just that fundraising's hard and like people didn't like the product. And Morris and I are a couple as well. People don't like couple co-founders. People don't like female co-founders.
I'm exactly in a very close situation, and I get that. I remember pitching to investors, and you have this questions or people who absolutely want to talk to your co-founder while you are in charge of the fundraising. So I get you. How did you manage to pass through that? Because thing is, when you have these kind of experiences, it's very hard to keep going and to keep going into this direction. I mean, fundraising, because you're talking to a bunch of investors and you realize that if all investors are like that, well, you may be thinking maybe it's not worth having investors in your board, because you don't want to start a relationship based on kind of such negative feelings. So you either keep going and continue to have this meeting with investors, or you be like, okay, let's just stop it right now and just continue in a different way.
Yeah. Pure persistence, I think, is what gets you through, and still maintaining a vague sense of faith in humanity, that not everyone's like that.
You're nice.
There are definite, my faith in humanity is low, don't worry, like low. I don't know, like after calls where Morris and I would be on a call and they'd ask a question, I would answer it, and then they would reply to Morris afterwards as if I hadn't spoken. after calls like that, I was like, I just want to give up. Like, this is ridiculous. But then you meet somebody who believes in you and backs you and contributes to your rounds, and like that's what keeps you going more than anything, is that there are people who either don't give a shit that you're a woman or think it's good. You know, I don't mind which it is, just as long as it's not that it's a bad thing, even subconsciously.
Yes.
And I think that's the reason that it took us a bit longer than I think we anticipated, and also like you can never help but benchmark yourself against other companies, is just because I think we expected it to be a bit more of a level playing field. And so we relied much more on introductions, like warm introductions to people, and that like slow snowball effect of this person knows these people, they'll introduce you, and it gained momentum. And we actually we went from a round half full to closed in 2 weeks. Like once it got going, it was fast. But we relied much more on introductions, like when you normally submit pitches cold, like that, nothing ever came of that, ever. It was always through people believing in us and saying, I'm backing this person, I think you should too. And eventually that got through.
That's great to hear. And what about for the second round? So you said on LinkedIn that it was very different. How different was that? Was it just easier to get the first meeting but harder to close it, or something else?
Easier to get the first meeting, yeah, definitely agree with that. Harder to gain that same level of momentum. It just took a bit longer. I think also we naively went out thinking it would be easier. And so it's not that we weren't trying hard, we were trying really hard. But like, I think there's like a level of grit and determination in your first round where you're like, I just have to do this. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try everything. And if you expect it to be easier in your second round, which we shouldn't have done, then you don't have quite that same level of like, I'm going to push through everything and do everything I need to. We kind of just sort of naively assumed that eventually we'd close the round because we had really good traction and we were generating revenue, quite a significant amount. And we just thought it would
that's a great position. I mean, that's the best position to be fundraising. Usually, if you don't have that, you're a bit worried. But if you do have the numbers backing you, then, well, I would also have thought it would have been easier then.
Yeah, and I think that we thought so. I mean, I can't tell you why it wasn't. Just depressingly, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Even though we had the numbers, we were growing really quickly, like onboarding 10 to 12 new companies every month, only spending $1,000 a month on B2B marketing and getting somewhere between 12 and 15 grand of revenue back from that. Like the metrics were great. Our LTV to CAC's about 26 times. Like in theory, it should be brilliant. I think a lot of factors just counted against us. Like, I think the space that we're in is particularly difficult for some people to get on board with. But then at the same time, if everybody hates the space and no solution's ever been done well, surely that's an enormous opportunity for somebody to do it well.
Yeah. How did you select the investors you wanted to talk to? Because I guess, as you said on your LinkedIn post, everyone is interested in the shiny things. If you're not doing AI or Web3, it could be more difficult. Even though lots of people put that on the deck, but doesn't mean they're doing anything with that. Or investors sometimes want to talk to people who do that, but they don't really get it anyway. So doesn't make sense. But still, how did you selected the investors you wanted to approach, looking that you kind of have to have a sense if they're open to an industry that may be less appealing for them?
In all honesty, we didn't. We just went to everybody.
Okay.
Because they won't say, "Oh, we don't like recruitment." Like that doesn't happen. And when everything that in the beginning was cold outreach, we just tried to target as many people as possible. Tried to get intros wherever we could. If there was anyone connected to anyone on LinkedIn, we'd ask them, "Do you possible?" There was no curation of investors over time. Obviously, there were some that we saw as a better fit than others, for later rounds where they're like, you're a bit early, and we'd have spoken to them, thought they were really nice. They've been helpful, supportive of the business, and we'll go back to them, when we're bigger. But generally it was going to as many people as possible, angels and VCs, and relying on introductions to that. We're not fussy in terms of having a really big name VC behind us or a really big angel investor. The most important thing to me, and I know to the other co-founders, is having people that are supportive of the
Yeah.
business and nice to deal with, because you're going to have to deal with them. They're on your cap table. They're not going
Yes.
away.
Yeah.
They're not going anywhere. So we favored actually in the end taking family office and angel money for a second time, rather than taking VC money.
Okay, so you do you think that the angel investors were actually more open to business from all kind of industries, and they have less bias against the recruitment industry?
Definitely. And I also found the treatment of me by angel investors and the positive emphasis that they placed on having a female co-founder was much nicer with angels than it was with VCs.
I wish I was hearing a different story, just to have more face in the industry for female
Yeah.
founder. But
Yeah.
I completely get what you're saying here. So yeah, makes sense. Um, it's actually really funny to hear all this from investors and see that they kind of reject lots of industries, because VCs, especially in Europe, are kind of risk adverse. So they will tend to back an industry that maybe or a business that is more stable, but still, well, in your case, it was still hard to find a good fit for that, for the VC case. So it's kind of different signals, where every VC said that they're investing in the latest trend, but then when you pitch to them with something very innovative, they kind of risk adverse. And then if you come with an idea that is very stable, well, it's too stable. It's kind of almost too boring for them. So that doesn't make sense.
And I think also like the future of work has been such a topic that VCs say they're interested in, and obviously like clearly hybrid working platforms and things that are accessories to the future of work have got a lot of investment, and HR tech is booming, but recruitment is left behind. And I find that funny, because how can the future of work exist if there's no way to find it? It can't.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's why Flexa can be enormous global. I hope to take it to be an enormous global company that, you'll be sitting in New York thinking about moving to London with your dog, and you'll wonder where you can get the same level of flexibility, and you go on Flexa and you'll find it, and it'll be perfect, and you won't have to waste your time.
How do you think the UK fits compared to other countries? Because something that I noticed when I came to the UK is the number of independent recruiters, and that's something that you may not have in other countries. You may have more in-house recruiters more than external recruiters. How do you think London and the UK just sits between all the different countries around?
Yeah, I think that there's obviously an enormous recruitment industry in the UK. I'm not really sure why that is. I think in terms of the UK, like flexible working penetration and like the culture of it, it's pretty similar to most of Western Europe, Scandinavia, and the Nordics. Like, not enormously different. I think the US is slightly behind, although slightly ahead and slightly behind. There's more remote roles, but then also more of an expectation of being in the office. Believe it's the same with Canada as well, and we see that with our clients in those different geographies. I think that just like there are a lot of things in the UK that I think are a bit more old school, like there's kind of more old school finance, insurance, recruitment, and those are the three industries again that they're obviously enormous for our economy, but they're quite behind in terms of ways of working. And also it's funny that there's such like an incumbent base of recruitment, and I think it will always exist, and there is still a need for it, as you said, whether that's internal or external. But because they take up such a lion's share of the talent attraction and recruitment market, it's meant that maybe it's been harder for startups to take off. They kind of get stuck at the 2 to 3K MRR points and then struggle to get past it any further.
We actually have a question from Yinch. What are Flexa's future plans, and also did attitudes changed as the lockdown came to an end?
Oh, attitude's definitely changed. Yeah, we've started to see a lot more companies go back to the office, where they were like, do you remember was it like May 2020? Everyone's like, the office is dead. No one's ever going back to the office. And all these studies were like, companies are never going to return to the office. It's like, they will. They will. And attitudes, like, as we've neared kind of things going back to normal, definitely more companies valuing an office and more people. It's just whether or not that's full time and whether you have a choice.
Yes.
And Flex's future plans. Well, 2022 hoping to be a really big year. Get to 2 million users by the end of 22 across those geographies that I talked about: Western Europe, Scandinavia, Nordics, US, and Canada. With over 800 companies, we're targeting about 850. So there are kind of two big overarching targets to get to, which will get us revenue targets that we want as well. We'll be raising a proper seed round Q1 of next year, I think, which is, we only just finished, but this one was like a bridging round. It wasn't a full round. We did it as an ASA. So I'll be starting on the fundraising track in January, and hopefully in order to get us to those goals, because they're quite because they sound like pretty punchy targets, but we're in a very fortunate position where all of our leads are inbound off the back of our digital marketing. So we don't do any cold outreach. Our sales team do no cold outreach, which is a dream for them. And it just means that our scaling is contingent on the scaling of digital marketing, which we've kind of tested and done before. And in theory, it will scale across all those geographies. So
you mentioned having a couple of people. What are the main roles you're trying to fill to complete the team?
Yeah, so the only role only two roles, sorry, that we now have left to fill is an account executive. So more of someone to help our head of sales with the leads that come in, and also looking at potentially either hiring a digital marketing agency or a performance marketer in-house over time as well. We've just hired an ops manager and an account manager in the last week. So yeah, it's very exciting.
All ready to go.
Yeah.
I love that. You also mentioned having to get back to fundraising in a few months. How do you feel about that? Because that's the thing. Yesterday I was in a call and actually someone said something really interesting, is that as soon as you start taking external investment, the clock starts ticking, because you have always to give feedback and give updates. But also you know that you're going to have to continue to fundraise again and again. So if you have investors investing in pre-seed, they will expect you to have a seed about a year after, or less or more, depend. So how do you feel about that now?
Not very excited. Okay, like, it's become part of it. As you're right, like, you have to continue fundraising.
Yeah.
I guess if I could design the process of fundraising, I'd fundraise much more like we have done, which is more like an agile approach. Take the money that you need, see if it scales, take more money, see if what you're doing scales, rather than going out and like, we're raising a £10 million Series A. There's a lot of glamour in that, and I think a lot of it's just talk, whereas like, do you actually need £10 million? I don't know, maybe.
I mean, you can always find something to do with that, but then it can also put you in a bad situation where if you're raising lots of money, there's also a lot of expectations, and can you do it in such a short amount of time and justify the 10 mils?
And I think so much of it is finger in the air, like so much of it is based on predictions, and you can take £10 million and of course you can put it to good use, and I've plenty of companies have doing brilliantly that have raised massive Series A's, but equally I kind of favour a slightly more considered approach of knowing exactly what you need, scaling from that, and then continuing, knowing what you need again, going again. But that's not the normal way of fundraising.
Yeah, but there is a big risk if you don't know exactly what you need and just raise for that or a bit more, but not huge amounts. If you do raise huge amounts, there is a big risk to actually start too many things without having lots of feedback. Like, the main metrics would become the growth of the internal company, like how many people do you have, how many people have you hired, and so with that you kind of lose the perspective of the real metrics of the company, the customer, finding your market fit, this kind of things that are actually key before growing too far.
You know, you hear people go, or come, like founders go, oh, we're going to be 500 people by the end of next year. And you're like, how do you know? Like, is that what's that based on? You're just going to hire before you have the metrics? Whereas we've hired based on capacity. Like if we're then over capacity, we then add and add. Like we're at a point now where we need to hire another salesperson because we have too many leads. We can't deal with them on our own. We had to hire an account manager because we have too many companies. We can't manage their relationships very well. We try to hire based on capacity, rather than using headcount as a sign of growth, because otherwise you've got a load of people sitting there, likely under capacity, which massively affects your company culture anyway. So I think some people get it really right, but I do think it's very, very hard to get it right when you don't necessarily know what you need. And I think that vanity metrics should be scrutinized more than they are.
I completely agree with that. So I have just a couple of questions left, and we are, well, soon reaching the end of the interview. So if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to put it in the chat right now, whatever the platform you're using. So we're live on a bunch of platforms: Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and I think that's about it. So whatever the platform, you can just ask your questions before we're running out of time. Do you have any advice for people who are also looking to build a business that can be seen as less sexy? Should they try to pursue this road? Should they try to really convince investors early on? Should they try to have stronger metrics, stronger traction maybe before going this road, because that's really difficult? Any tips for people looking to build such companies?
My number one piece of advice to anyone is always to ignore everyone's advice until everybody's telling you the same thing. Suddenly, if everybody tells you the same thing, then stop paying attention. But we took people's advice that we perceived as knowing more than us about certain topics, and we made some really bad decisions off the back of that, and they set us back. And actually, when you no one knows your business better than you do, even in the early stages. To trust your own instincts. But having said that, I will also offer some advice. Feel free to ignore it. And that is that I think traction is probably one of the most important things that you can ever go out to investors with, even if it's just a sign of users' willingness to pay for the service as well. I think there are lots of massive success stories, like PayPal took 10 years to monetize. LinkedIn took 6, I think. And so people think that they can get away with free platforms forever. People do still want to see that people are willing to pay. And we definitely saw that, when we had trial users, when we were in beta and we were just getting customer feedback and client feedback. Investors definitely wanted to see that they were willing to pay for that service, and they were. So that was great. But that's a really big one to focus on. But equally then, and I say again, don't always listen to advice. Monetizing too early on can also be a bad thing, because it forces you to make different decisions that won't necessarily benefit the growth of your business. So it really depends on the kind of business that you have, whether you're driven to, with a relatively sort of high value service where you rely less on a network effect. Obviously, monetization is a better option. If you're a marketplace, supply and demand, don't monetize it early on. There are just so many different nuances, and I think that people are very inclined to give advice based on their own experience, but that doesn't always mirror yours.
And then, well, if you have a clear plan and want to stick to that, you can always find ways to connect the dots and justify your choice, justify everything. So I think it's more of a matter of being able to take a step back from your business, rather than listening to everyone or to anyone or to no one or whatever, but just trying to find a way to just look at the business from a different perspective rather than listening to anyone.
Yeah, and listening. The main people you should listen to are your customers.
Yes.
More than anything else. But not necessarily directly listen, because they'll obviously tell you things that they think they want, but that doesn't necessarily mean they want them.
Yes, for sure. You have to read between the lines.
Exactly. Read between the lines of it and kind of put a research hat on and think, how is this a problem?
How did you validate the idea before having the beta in place?
Um, so a lot of kind of user interviews and understanding the market. So my background is obviously market research, strategy consulting, and UX research as well. So I guess I was in quite a fortunate position in that respect to be able to try and evaluate it. I just heard so many anecdotal stories. Obviously, it's dangerous always to go on anecdotes, but there were so many of them that I was like, this can't just be coincidence. And then a lot of companies talking about struggling to improve their employer brand and get discovered for anything beyond a job description. Unless you're like Patagonia or Google or Facebook and, everybody knows you, although probably no one wants to work for Facebook now. But they had, back in 5 years ago, they had a good employer brand.
Yes.
So I think we had a lot of companies struggling with that kind of talent attraction piece. And we thought, well, surely transparency solves both of these problems. And I just started to talk to more and more people about that and try to understand the problem a bit deeper. But then, what we originally launched with was not actually the right solution. And we then pivoted to it. We actually pivoted before a fundraise, which was very risky, but it paid off.
I love to hear that. That's great and motivating for anyone who's maybe is in the same situation, maybe pivoting before a fundraise, or hesitant to launch something or to talk to potential customers before having something to show. So that's very encouraging, and sometimes pivoting is actually a good thing. It's only people who are outside of the startup ecosystem who see that as a risk. Everyone else just see that as learning from experience.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're reaching the end of the interview now. Do you have any last tips or resources, maybe something that has helped you in any way?
I'm terrible for resources. I don't read anything, which is really bad.
That's okay.
Laura's like, all of these books and wonderful things. I'm like, God, I haven't read a book in about 2 years, which is terrible.
Maybe a community or some groups, some programs, accelerators, or anything like that.
Yeah, we were never part of any accelerator. I would say that the most useful thing to us has been they're not necessarily even investors, supporters, people that have kind of seen, maybe they've been previous founders, mostly previous founders actually, that have been really helpful to us or current. I went into this with no startup experience from a pretty corporate background. I didn't know any other founders. And then actually during lockdown, people reach out to you, you chat to people, you learn from experiences, you laugh about how shit it can be sometimes. And that's been pretty huge for me, definitely, from not feeling like I'm going mad and not feeling like you're in it alone, is just speak to as many fellow founders as possible. And actually I've made some friends out of it as well, which is quite nice. And it means then you've got friends who share a similar experience to you. And I think that's very valuable, especially women. I think we do have quite a different experience in the startup ecosystem to the majority of founders who are probably in their late 20s, early 30s, male. And they have a different experience to women.
I couldn't agree more with that. Well, thank you so much, Molly, for your time. This has been super interesting, and I love your very open approach, talking about things that not everyone wants to hear about, not everyone wants to listen, but that's important to repeat it, because that's out there. That's hard. Being a founder is hard, and it's important to understand why exactly it's hard. What steps are very difficult. So thanks a lot for your time, and thanks for everyone who have been around with us for the entire hour.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the video of today will be available on my YouTube channel on Monday afternoon. So if anyone missed the beginning or want to share it, it will be there. Also, the next live stream will be, so the next AMA will be in a month. The next live stream will be next week, as I do now a bit more streams, just to stay around with the community, talk to more people and more founders about their own story and their own challenges, but also trying to do other things. So next week should be a Createch stream, so we should be experimenting with some creativity tech stuff. I have no idea yet what we'll be doing, so if you have suggestions, reach out, please. That will also be my birthday weekend, so maybe doing something on the theme, I have no idea. Anyway, another thank you to people who are supporting me on my Buy Me a Coffee page. So Yinch, Zappa, Andrea, and Roy. And also to all the new people who have been following during the stream. So thank you to... I'm going to try to read that, but I am far away from the screen. So we have a Kagate, Leslie. Thank you so much for your recent follow. And thanks again to Metaburai for your new subscribe on Twitch. That's it. I'm not going to ramble for too long. Enjoy all the fantastic weekend to come, and I hope to see you soon, either on the Discord, on social media, or for the next stream. Thanks everyone. Bye.